several years ago. 23 this coming month. We did a little excursion from Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas, a couple days. And I remember getting on that ship during the afternoon and then doing the things that you do on the ship. And then going to bed. All along, that ship is moving, going to bed, and waking up in the morning in the port, in the harbor, in Nassau, Bahamas. I was doing my thing during the daytime, and while I was sleeping, the ship was moving to its destination. A couple years ago, we were gifted a trip to Bermuda on a little nicer boat than the one we took to the Bahamas. That's a whole story in and of itself. And we, the same thing, pulled out of this time, out of near Staten Island, New Jersey, Bayonne, New Jersey. And when you get on the boat, you know, everybody's excited, the boat's taking off, and then after that initial excitement, everybody starts to do the different activities that are on the boat. And all the time, the whole time, that boat's moving. And if you go to the back of the boat, you would see the land getting further and further distance. You would see the white waves in the background from the propeller churning up the water. And whether you're playing games or whether you're going on the water slide or swimming in the pool or hanging out in your room or eating in the restaurants on the boat, that boat is moving to a particular destination. And you just assume it. And you just trust it. And the very next day, we arrived, well, a couple days, in the port at Bermuda and saw very different sights than we saw pulling out of the New York City harbor there. But you can take for granted, while these activities are going on, that the boat is moving to its destination. And this text, this passage, reminds us that God's ship is not a speedboat, but it always arrives at the point of destination. And I want you to see from Genesis chapter 21 that today, for the life of Abraham and Sarah, God's boat gets to its destination. See, in the middle of life, we can take for granted the continual, faithful presence of God shaping our lives in Him. God has told us in the book of Philippians that the work He's begun in us, He's going to complete at the day of Jesus Christ. That boat gets to the destination. But for some reason in our minds, we can think that time lapses and the speed at which God works invalidates or removes what He has promised, but it doesn't. Whether it takes 100 years, whether it takes 20 years, whether it takes 5 years or a week, it never invalidates what He has promised. It will get done. We also can have a tendency to be attached to some of the things that we try to solve our problems with in faithlessness. And God has to wean us from those issues in our shaping. And then another thing that can be a problem with us is we might not think much of the small steps of faith that God's calling us to, thinking they don't contribute much, but they do. And what I want us to understand this morning from the text is don't miss. While I was in bed, I could hear that hum of the engines that kept going. Kept churning the water, kept moving the propeller. Whether I was playing ping pong on deck, grabbing an ice cream cone, whatever other things you do on a cruise ship, that hum of that engine was going. And it was taking me places. Don't miss the constant hum in the background of the Lord growing you and taking you all the way home. See, through the life of Abraham, we can see the steady, though slow, admittedly, advancement of God's promise to being with Abraham all the way in the ups and downs and the twists and turns of life. First thing I want you to see this morning from verses 1 through 7 is very simply, no surprise, God always does what He says. That's so simple, it's so cliche, and it is no less true than it was for Abraham to understand and believe that it is for us today. Notice over and over in verse 21, 1 through 7, The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. The Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. The Lord gave him a son at the set time of which God had spoken. Sarah bore to him. Abraham obeys as God had commanded him. God always does what he has said. And what has he said? Well, you can trace this out all through the story. But in chapter 12, verse 2, he said, I will make of you a great nation. In chapter 13, verse 16, he said, you're going to have descendants that are going to be like the sand of the sea. They're going to be like shining stars in the sky, in chapter 13 and verse 16. In chapter 15, verse 4 and 5, he told Abraham these words, Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This one, Ishmael, shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. He's told this all along. In chapter 17, verse 15 through 22, the Lord said, As for Sarah, your wife, she will not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be your name, and I will bless you and give you a son by her. Nations will come through you. Kings will come for you. And Abraham laughs. And he says, God, please just let it be Ishmael. And God says, no. In chapter 17 and verse 19, Sarah, your wife, will bear a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. He's going to be the one. And then in chapter 18, verse 9 through 15, when God visits Abraham with the two messengers, and Abraham hosts a meal for him, and Sarah is in the tent, and God says, Where's Sarah, your wife? He says, Here in the tent. God says in verse 10, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. She laughs. How could this happen? In verse 13, chapter 18, and the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And chapter 21, verse 1 says, And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. What is it that as you look back in your life, when you think about it and where you are now in your journey with God, that years ago you would have probably laughed at? That you would have said, God, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. Maybe it's some very difficult things. Some really severe hardships that back then you could not see how God could make any good come from that. And now, like the song we sang, My God's glory and my good, though that was hard, though that was severe, though it tore you up, God made you somebody who you would not be without those things. What's something that you took for granted when you were younger that now you say, that was a gift from God? And God always does what he says. In a world where promises are often broken, in a world where words are hollow, in a world where social media and experts and influence are always giving us advice that always changes, we find an unwavering truth, and it is this: God always does what he says. His word isn't just a suggestion, it's a guarantee. When God makes a declaration, it's as good as it's done. Now, I want you in your mind to think about the most dependable person you know. Now, multiply that by infinity, because that's our God. His promises aren't maybes or hopefullys. They are absolute certainties. This means, then, that we can anchor our lives, tether our lives to his word, knowing it will always hold truth. And let me be clear, if you didn't get it yet. God always does what he says. Every promise he's made, every prophecy he's uttered, every single word from his mouth will come to pass. This isn't just a comforting thought that gives us warm fuzzies. It's the very foundation of our faith. So there was laughter and joy that was going on. And when Sarah says, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I bore him a son in his old age? You know what the answer to that question is? God did. The Lord did. and she's able to laugh in joy. But we live in a broken world. And in our lives, we also God doesn't take away the consequences of our unbelief. And one of these consequences is still hanging around. And there was other laughter that was going on that reminded them of the failures of our own faithless solutions that we make. And there's an earlier arrival, Ishmael, who's causing a rivalry with the promised one to whom we'll receive the inheritance. But God's going to deal with that too. You see, Abraham's become very attached, and you can understand that, to his firstborn son Ishmael, through his work of the flesh rather than through the Spirit. And the time has come now that Isaac is about 3 years old, because that's about how long they would breastfeed their children. And the child grew and was weaned. And you might not think that's a big deal, but in a world where there was a lot of infant mortality, when a child is weaned, he's not depending on his mother for food, but getting food from other sources. That's a big mark of maturity. This child has made it. He's arrived, and he's taken he's in the next stage now. And so Abraham's going to throw a feast. And so while he does this, apparently Abraham's firstborn son, through Hagar the Egyptian, Ishmael, now laughs at the son. But she's not laughing in the way Sarah did, full of joy. The word is literally laugh, and you can see your Bible's probably put an interpretation on that word laugh. It just literally says laughing, and some of them interpreted it that as scoffing or scorning, and that's probably correct. There's a different, he's laughing at Isaac, not with Sarah. And so Sarah says to Abraham, this rivalry's got to stop. There has to be a detachment here. And what Abraham had grown very attached to, and the consequences of his sin. Now God is going to tell Abraham, hey Abraham, you're throwing a party for Isaac being weaned off his mother. I'm going to wean you off something. You're going to have to give something up. You're going to have to surrender to something, your work of the flesh here. And God works through our unbelieving consequences. God's going to teach Abraham something. And so the early arrival, Ishmael, now the table's going to turn here, and Isaac is going to be the one promoted. Now this has happened already in the story of the book of Genesis. Remember the serpent, who was probably the early arrival, probably envious of man and woman made in God's image, and there's a conflict that happens. You remember Cain and Abel, Cain, the older one, and Abel, the younger one, and a rivalry that develops, and this chaos that happens from that. And now this story, and it will continue to unfold, Jacob and Esau and others. This is a common thing. But what I want you to see through this is that God is going to, unlike Abraham before, listening to Sarah's voice and taking Hagar wrongly with a lack of faith, now God is going to say, Abraham, I want you to listen to Sarah's voice because she's right about this. He's really bothered by it in verse 11. This matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the latter, because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman because he is your seed. So God's going to wean Abraham off of this attachment here. God's going to ask him to surrender his firstborn son. I wonder if he's going to ask him also later on to surrender the other son. Right? Next chapter. But Abraham's got to learn this lesson first. You have to be weaned off of this attachment here, Abraham, and you have to be full in and focused on what God has said, what God has revealed, God's word, as to how this is going to come about. So, Abraham does, and God, because he is such a gracious God and merciful God, he also takes care of Hagar and Ishmael and provides water. And he hears the affliction. He hears her cry, the cries of Ishmael here as he's dying of thirst in the desert. And he opens Hagar's eyes. And remember, he had already told Hagar in earlier chapters when this very similar scene had happened before. It's a repeating pattern. That I will make Ishmael a great nation. I'll bless him. I'll take care of him. And now Hagar is in the desert with her son, and they've run out of water, but God has already said, I'll make him a great nation. So he's going to survive this, but it seems like she's in agony, has forgotten this. Instead of calling on the Lord, Lord, remember what you said, take care of us. She's groaning out in agony, and the boy is, and God still comes. Verse 17, God heard the voice of the lad, and he called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, and repeats what he's already told her way back, for I will make him a great nation. She opened her eyes and saw a well of water. This is the well in Beersheba. The well literally means the well of seven. She saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. Now listen to these words. So God was with the lad, and he becomes another nation. Another nation. He prospers. It's going to be a rivalry to the promised line, but he becomes another nation because God's with him. And what I want you to understand is, secondly, God can work through our unbelieving consequences. Both Abraham and Hagar that day had to surrender to God with their son. And aren't you glad to know that where we have made foolish, faithless choices, God can redeem those, and God is kind, and God provides when we surrender our solutions. We think we have the answers. We think we can be God. We think we can save ourselves. And every time we come up with our own solution, apart from God, we need to say, wait a minute, God, you take this. Surrender that to him. You see, it's easy to think that when we mess up, when we falter in our faith and face the consequences of our unbelief, we're on our own. But here's the incredible truth, that God even works through our unbelieving consequences. He doesn't abandon us in the mess that we've made. Instead, he even uses those very situations to teach and refine and ultimately bring us back to him. You and I, we're as humans, we all have moments of doubt, moments when our actions don't align with God, with our faith, that lead to different outcomes. But God is so profound, he is so wise, he is so redemptive, that he can take the very consequences, the Ishmaels, of our unbelief, and he can weave them into a greater plan. He can turn our missteps into stepping stones. He can turn our failures into testimonies of his grace. Have you ever experienced a situation where, boy, you took a wrong turn and it was dumb? And it led to a difficult outcome. But even in the midst of that, God showed up in an unexpected way. And you know why that's true? Because God works even through our unbelieving consequences. That's the merciful, gracious, wise God that he is. He doesn't just clean up our messes. He transforms them to be used in his plan. Doesn't take away the consequences, folks. But he even uses our human frailty to display his power and his wisdom. And so as Abraham surrenders his firstborn, then another small piece, God uses that. It says it came to pass in that same time. Another small piece of the promise comes into the plan. And this is the last part here, at verses 22 through 34. Why in the world is this story about Abraham and this Philistine king, Abimelech, and his commander of his armies having a conversation about a well? Why is that in here? Why not just go to chapter 22, that story we all love about Isaac on the mountain? Because here's the third thing. God is with us as we obey him, and a lot of times as we obey him looks like things that aren't sensational. They're small steps. God's with us as we obey him. You see, what happens is Abimelech, we met him in chapter 20. Remember the situation with Sarah and Abimelech. And God uses Abimelech to call Abraham to his missional purposes and pray and intercede and bless the nations. And God uses Abraham, as Abraham finally dragging his feet does what he's called to do to bless the nations by praying for this man. God gives, remember at the end of chapter 20, God gives children to Abimelech, his wife, and their household. They bear children. And then God provides a child to Sarah upon that. And now they're coming again to Abimelech. And Abimelech meets Abraham. And the Philistines can see God is with Abraham. Can see that Abraham's God is Emmanuel, God with us. And the scripture says, it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the army, spoke to Abraham and said, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me by God that you'll not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me in the land in which you have dwelt. So they see that God's with him. And they also want Abraham to know, as he brings his commander of the armies with him, that I got a little flex here. And we can see God's with you, but that also could be a threat to us. And so we want to make sure that at the offset, things are on the table and we are at peace with each other. And there's a benefit, a synergy to our relationship. So that's their view. Well, Abraham's okay with that. Make peace. And verse 26, Abraham says, I will swear. And Abraham says, and also, by the way, this situation happened. Some of your servants took this well that I dug here. And I just want you to know that this well that I dug, it's mine. We put our effort into it. And while we're here talking, I want to make this covenant with you through these 7 female sheep, 7 female lambs, so that it's recorded that this well is my well. And it's the well of Beersheba, or literally Hebrew, the well of 7. The same well earlier that Hagar had her eyes opened to. Abraham can bless the nations now with the presence of God, and he's been given the seed. Now he has the son, the promised one, but he doesn't have the land yet. And guess what? He's still not going to have the land. But you know what he has? He has a 5 or 7 foot in diameter hole in the ground in Canaan. And this hole in the ground has water. And water is a source of life. And what God is doing here is showing him that, Abraham, you can plant my flag in the ground here. Because from this well and the tree that you plant with it, by it, the tamarisk tree, and the things that this well will provide, that your descendants will later come back to, is a reminder that I keep my promise, and I do it little by little, but I keep my promise. I get it done. And so God gives them this little, this whatever the size of a well is, and they shake hands on it. This well of 7, a well made covenant with him and Abimelech because of these seven ewe lambs. And so verse 31, therefore he called that place Beersheba, or the well of 7, because the 2 of them swore an oath there. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. So Abimelech rose with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and they were called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham stayed. Notice it's not his land yet. Abraham stayed as a sojourner, as a pilgrim, as a stranger, but at peace, with a well now, in the land of the Philistines, many days. God's with us as we obey him. Obedience is certainly about God's commands, but the point of it even deeper is it's about relationship with the Lord. And here's the beautiful outcome. That as Abraham walks as a blessing to the nations in this land where he's a foreigner, God is with him as he obeys God. And our walk isn't a solitary walk. It's a partnership with the everlasting God. And when we align our will with His, we experience His tangible presence. And even the Philistines can say, God's with you. His guidance and His strength we experience in a profound way. And when we step out in obedience, even when it's difficult or countercultural, not like the Philistines, even when it's difficult, we're not alone. God is with us as we obey Him. He doesn't just watch from afar. He empowers us. He equips us. He ensures us that our obedient steps are fruitful and lead to His intended good. The pathway to experiencing God's active presence in your life through His Spirit is seeing His hand move in profound ways. It's clear. God is with us as we obey Him. So our obedience isn't a burden. It's an invitation to start claiming what God has promised, a deeper fellowship, divine assistance, so a life living in constant awareness of His unwavering support. So God is with us as we obey Him. And I wonder, do the Philistines of this world see that God is with you? Do they see that the name of your God is Emmanuel, God with us? Do they see that there's something real, something tangible about what it means to live as a Christian with the power and the presence of God? That you are ambassador of a kingdom that they cannot see. In the middle of life, we can take for granted that continued faithful presence of God shaping our lives. But that ship and that hum of the engine is moving to its port of destination. And our minds can begin to work and play tricks on us, that a time lapse between what God has said and what we're experiencing here means that His promise is detached from our lives. And we can get into some trouble trying to exercise our own faithless problem solving and solution and not think much of what it is to take the next foot in front of you, next step in front of you, small steps of faithful obedience. But friends, God shapes us. And don't miss the constant hum in the background of the Lord growing you and taking you all the way home. God always does what He says. God works through our unbelieving consequences. God is with us as we obey Him. And therefore, we are to obey Him in faith and the strong care of His unchanging promise. That promise to mercifully pursue us all the days of our life. That's where we stand with our father Abraham. And God is calling one of ours, in particular here, in a very particular way, Lorraine Smith, to walk in an uncertain path. And she went to the ER this week thinking there may have been symptoms of something, and they thought maybe it was a stroke from last week. And they found out that there is a tumor on her brain. And so Tuesday of this week, she is going to Portland, and she's going to have brain surgery to remove this tumor. And it's frightening and it's scary to walk through uncertain things. But Lorraine has surrendered her heart to the Lord and asked the Lord to do this. Lord, will you use me even in this, so that people will know that the peace that I have comes from the Lord? And so what I want to do as a pastor is pray for Lorraine and Bill and Naomi as they help walk through this. Have Birch pray for her. And then after Birch and I pray, anyone else who wants to join in and verbal prayer to the Lord, please certainly join us, silent prayer. I want to do that here because we want, just like we would send off a missionary to a far-off country, we want to send our sister Lorraine, who we're joined together in the faith, to be a sent one, as a vessel where God has chosen at this time to put a spotlight on her life as an example to us of what it is to walk in faith, not knowing what the next step will be. And every day, all Lorraine has to do is take the next step. And then the next day, the next step, really the next moment. Day by day, grace by grace. And just like God led Abraham, just like God has led us, God will lead Lorraine to whatever his next step for her is. At this point, it looks like it's going to be a cancerous tumor that's removed, and it looks like perhaps it's chemo and radiation after that. But regardless of what it is, though we don't know the future, we know the one who always does what he says, who even works through our failures in the belief. And Lorraine will share with you, about the things in life, or she wished, she had believed the Lord more. But really, it doesn't matter, because God is here at this point in her life, and he is with her as she walks in faith. So amen. I'm going to go to the back, and I'm going to pray with Birch over Lorraine, and then invite anybody else who wants to just join us in prayer, lifting your hands to the Lord over Lorraine and asking for God to give her a special power, guide the doctor's hands, protect her from this cancer, but more importantly, protect her from the lies of the evil one, replace them with the truth of who God is.